Hey there, my name is Harry Locke IV. I am a writer, director, and digital colorist based in the Los Angeles area, grading everything from feature films to episodic content, music videos, commercials, short films, and more. I was contacted by the Dehancer team to try out the latest version of their plugin, Dehancer Pro, for the editing application of my choice, which is DaVinci Resolve, and give an honest opinion of how I feel about the plugin. And so that's basically what this video is going to be. My perspective of using Dehancer Pro on not just a project that I directed, but also a project that I recently completed for a client. And I'm going to show how I was able to develop two different looks and two very effective looks that service those projects using the tools provided in Dehancer Pro. Also, towards the end of the video, I'm going to dive into how I use Handbrake, a free application that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, to make sure I am preserving all that grain work that I do in the color application when uploading to the web. As I'm sure many of you have encountered when uploading to YouTube, Vimeo, or other similar services, they tend to have these really aggressive compressing algorithms that turns all that fine-tuned grain work we've done into really undesirable macro blocking. And I'm going to show how I combat that using Handbrake. Now, I do have to say that usually I'm not a fan of using third-party plugins when it comes to my color work. And that's not because I'm some anti-LUT or anti-plugin purist when it comes to color. No, it's the exact opposite. I am totally of the mindset that you should be using whatever tool or tools works best for you and your client, and arriving at that happy end result is the path that you should be traveling. So if you've got LUTs, plugins, or there's a particular effect suite that works for you, by all means, keep on rocking on. I've got nothing to say to that. My particular stance with plugins happens to do with the way that I work. As a freelance colorist, I don't always get the chance to work from my home grading studio. Often I'm bouncing around from different post facilities in the Los Angeles area, where it can be tricky to get facility managers to license effects or plugins that they don't already have registered in-house. The one realm, though, where you can often argue to get them to buy an extra seat for something is when it comes to plugins that can do film emulation and do film emulation very well. And the primary reason for that is turning digital videography into more cinematic, more filmic experience is probably the number one request we get from a client when they walk through the door. So any plugin that's allowing us to not only get better results, more closer results to true film, but also allows us to do it at a much faster process is definitely a plugin or an app that's really gonna raise our attention. And so that's why I think with what Dehancer Pro has to offer, it's gonna become very quickly, if not already, one of those must-have plugins for achieving that film emulation look. And we'll take a look at how I've been using it with some of these examples. The first example I have is a project that I'm very familiar with, because not only was I the colorist, I was also the writer and the director. This is my award-winning short film, The Redeemer, which I will include a link to below in case you're interested in checking out the full film. The initial grading of this film took place back in 2019 and did not use Dehancer. So I thought it'd be fun to take a look and see how I would use Dehancer Pro to change things up in 2023. What you're seeing here is the raw, ungraded red footage. Now here's how that same footage looks using Resolve's Color Transform tool to bring the log footage into a Rec. 709 color space. And I've also gone through and done some basic corrections, balancing, and secondary work to get the shots sort of close to where they were in the finished 2019 grade. Now here's the same footage with Dehancer Pro applied. Pretty cool. Right away you can see that compression in the highlights that kicks in, giving the image more of an analog curve as opposed to a digital clipping. But let's see what else is going on under the hood here. There's a couple of different ways you can use Dehancer Pro, and there's some really good in-depth tutorials that you can check out on YouTube, as well as on Dehancer's official website to learn more. but I essentially prefer to use Dehancer Pro as a finishing node at the end of my node tree after doing my primary corrections and obvious secondary tweaks. Any additional changes that I feel may need to be made to the image after applying Dehancer Pro will either be done within Dehancer's control panel or nodes that I will add to precede the Dehancer Pro node. Within Dehancer Pro, there's a plethora of options that you can use to tweak the look. Now, I won't go into all of these, but I will point out some of the major tweaks here that are affecting this particular grade. Right off the bat, I want to point out this section, which I'm not really using in this example, but goes back to my statement that there's different ways you can use Dehancer Pro. I personally prefer to drop the plugin on my footage after already taking it out of a log color space using either the color space transform effect in Resolve or by spinning the color wheels the old-fashioned way. But some users may prefer to let Dehancer Pro handle the color space transform up front, and you can do that here. There's a bevy of camera options, but the most direct path allows you to hit source and then choose camera. Now, my director of photography shot this film on a red helium 8K with an S35 sensor. And the format was IPP2 RWG Log 3G10 standard. Now, this is going to look insane, and the reason why is because of all the other corrections going on here and because I have already added a color transform node at the top. But if I were to deactivate these nodes and pretend as if I had used Dehancer Pro as my starting transform node, this would essentially be doing the same work as Resolve's Color Space Transform plugin. And this way allows you to do a great deal of work right in Dehancer Pro from the very beginning. Now, here's where we can begin to see what's really crafting this look. This tab holds host to a slew of really amazing film profiles that you can use to help craft your look. You can really just get lost in a time suck going through all these profiles, but the film profile I settled on for this run is Kodak Ektachrome E100 2017. Now, I am not by any stretch of the imagination a film stock maven. I couldn't even tell you what the characteristics or traits are of even 10% of the stocks that are being offered here can do. But I will say that this particular stock, the Kodak Ektachrome that I'm using on this grade, is a stock that inherently holds values of saturation and vibrant colors and does well with outdoor daytime footage, which is essentially what I needed for this project. Not so much even on a technical level, but on a narrative level. You know, I'm often telling individuals who are interested in what colorists do and who colorists are, and I try to drive home the point that we are not just technicians that are there to make an image look cool. You know, we are there to service that overall narrative function and to extend the purpose of the story. You know, I'm often asking, what is our intent here? You know, what is the overall thematic theme we're trying to do before proceeding forward with the color? And in this particular film, The Redeemer, I wanted to craft a Western that strayed a bit from the typical Western conventions. I didn't want to go down the road of that typical sepia brown wash color palette. I wanted something a little bit more graphic, a little bit more vivid, a little bit more saturated, and that has to do with the story that's being told. You've got these characters that are enduring a great deal of violence and tragedy, but their lives are juxtaposed against these beautiful landscapes. And that kind of dichotomy was a huge part of the story. So picking a film stock that inherently has saturated and vibrant colors was a bit of a no-brainer moving forward with that stock. That being said, it would be great moving forward with future versions of the software if the Dehancer team could at least group the black and white and color profiles into their own categories, so we can have an idea of what's what without it seeming like a lotto process in selecting a film profile. Film developer and film compression tools are all helping to enhance the Dehancer grade. Film compression in particular is a handy one. It kind of helps wrangle these highlights and takes them out of a digital space and gives them a more filmic analog feel. Now, these last three are the real fun ones. It's got all the controls you would come to expect with film grain emulation in terms of the size of the grain, the amount of the grain, and also comes with a film resolution slider so that you can essentially affect the softness of the image. And I don't just mean blurring the image. This is much more like applying a film softness to enhance the sharper edges of digital videography. There's also the ability to affect grain in the shadows, mids, highlights, and chroma channels. Now by default, the plugin places the film type value as negative, which creates grain that is more pronounced in the highlights. For this look, however, I prefer to go with positive, which produces a softer grain that I just prefer more for this particular film's aesthetic. Mode is interesting, as it helps dictate what type of hardware processing under the hood Dehancer will do for the grain. Analog, the default, requires more processing power, but will result in lifelike emulation. Now I'm on a system that can handle Dehancer on native 8K red footage with no problems. It's pretty beefy, though I am playing this back at 4K scope and not true 8K here. So keep in mind your mileage may vary depending on what kind of system you're on. We have another option here called Digital Experimental, which according to the Dehancer site is meant to help counter compression of grain you may face when uploading to the web by generating a more simplified grain within the plugin. Now, I have not tested this, but we will come back to this topic of web compression a little later. The next section here that I really love is halation. Now again, there's tons of sources you can look up to fully understand what is going on with halation and why it happens when shooting on film. But essentially, it's a red orangish glow or halo that appears around the edges of overexposed areas and is really noticeable on reds around the midtone area. For this film, the color red is a huge part of its production design. A lot of characters have red accents as a part of their wardrobe, so the halation effect really helps create this nice soft glow and just gives the image a wonderful texture. Now you do have to be careful with halation. Since it affects reds in the midtone range, this does mean it can affect skin tones and leave an undesirable effect. Dehancer does have a masking mode you can enter that will help you see what areas you are affecting, but this does bring me to my second minor critique, and that it would be nice to be able to have some sort of custom windowing or masking tool built inside the plugin so I can window off things like the talent's face so that they are not affected by certain qualifiers. There is a workaround for this right now, however, and it's not that bad. You can simply make another node and copy this node with your Dehancer adjustments to the new node, which is going to double up everything at first, but now in this duplicate node, we will go through and disable everything but halation. Now I'm going to adjust the halation to where I want it to be. I like what it's doing on this cloth, but not so much on his face or the sky. So what I can do now is make a window for just this cloth. And track it. And that's pretty good, but his face still has a little reddish glow there. So I'll make another window in the same node. This time making it a mask out node. And then I'll track his head. And there we go. Now I have the ramped up halation I'm looking for, and his skin doesn't look like a radioactive cherry. Just like halation, bloom is also giving off a very nice glow here on the image. Anyone who has used a pro mist filter on lenses is probably familiar with trying to get the bloom effect, which is kind of this feather light effect that extends from the borders of an image. Here, I'm not using it to an overwhelming degree, but just enough to soften the image. Combined, I really have to say the elements that are being offered in Dehancer Pro really help elevate the grade from where it initially was in 2019. And my primary reason for saying that is, at least with this sample, I can see that it helps me achieve closer to the original vision that myself and my director of photography, Matthew Halla, and our production design team was seeking to do at the outset of planning this film, and that was to create a very cinematic, very moody, very organic experience. And I feel like I'm actually able to get the grade closer to what our original vision was using Dehancer Pro's toolset. And also I'm able to do it at a much faster pace than what I was able to do with the tools available to me back in 2019. The second example I have is a fun one from a yet-to-be-released docu-series I recently finished coloring for a client. The show is a mix of talking head interview clips shot on Sony FX9 with a ton of old archival footage used as B-roll. On occasion, there are sections in the episodes where the producers did reenactments that were filmed on the Sony FX9 with the hope that I could transform them in Resolve to match the quality and feel of some of the old, genuine archival footage. As you watch this sequence, you see there's this traveling salesman hitting the highway en route to his next destination, and it all looks like old black and white archival footage. But that's because you're looking at the end result. These 3 shots here are Sony FX9 shots and actually look like this ungraded. Not so old and not so black and white. These shots need to be dehanced in every sense of the word in order to sync up with the old, genuine archival. So here's where you can get creative, using not only what Dehancer provides you in the application, but adding some outside elements as well to really dial in a retro effect. Now in these shots, I actually did allow Dehancer to handle the log to Rec 709 conversion up front. Now for some reason, it did not have Cinema Line FX9 as an option here. So I just went ahead with FX6 and then selected S-Log3 S-Gamut3.Cine ISO 800. Since that was the closest setting to what the cinematographer used on set. From there, I searched for a black and white film profile that would work best on the FX9 footage and get it into a close space with the old, genuine archival footage. I ended up choosing Agfa Scala 200X, which is a black and white slide film that's no longer in production in real life, but is pretty active here in Dehancer Pro. I then enabled some more Dehancer Pro effects like film breath, which adds the flickers of exposure and color change you often see in old film. As well as gate weave, which emulates the bounce of the film strip as it is being pulled through the frame window of a film camera. Some additional nodes were added past the Dehancer node to help with overall tint, and some power windows were added to help shape the shot. In the end, I was really happy with how the footage had transformed, but I knew it could use a couple of more steps to really sell the effect. I went into my archive of overlays and was able to find a dirt and scratches overlay that I could place over the footage to enhance it further like the real archival. I went to the edit page and dropped the dirt and scratches overlay on the graded FX9 clips like so. And then changed the composite mode to overlay. Now the first thing I noticed is that the overlay is introducing a shift in luminance to the grade, and the scratches are white, which does not match the black scratches on the genuine archival shots. So in the color page, I do a slight adjustment on the gain knob, and that looks good. And then I go over to the effects tab to find the invert effect, which will shift the scratches from white to black. Here it is. I'm going to add a node, toss it on, and there, looks good. Lastly, the client was able to find a film mat from their own effects library that matched the genuine archival. I dropped it on the edit page, and now the FX9 shots have been dehanced beautifully to match the rest of the world around it. Overall, between these two projects, I have to say that I am very, very impressed with what Dehancer Pro has to offer. You know, like I said at the outset of the video, I'm really not a fan of adding third-party plugins to my arsenal, but I do have to say, with the results that I'm getting from Dehancer Pro, it's kind of moved its way up into being one of those must-haves in terms of getting added to my tool set, just because not only am I able to get a great look, I'm able to get it pretty quickly. And speed is a huge thing when you're in a room working with clients and you're trying to build a look, you're trying to build a grade. Clients are working on a budget and you have a specific amount of time, specific amount of hours and time base to get things done. And with Dehancer Pro, I really feel like we can explore a bunch of different options, dial in the one we want, and come out with a really good, crisp look, all within a relatively short time, thanks to the way the app is structured. And if you're looking at this video and you're thinking, hey, yeah, I could really use Dehancer Pro as part of my arsenal, then please use the affiliate code that I have at the bottom of the video. You're gonna get 10% off of purchasing the plugin. And I think at that price point, it's an absolute steal and a must-have to add Dehancer Pro to your tool set. There's also an iOS version of Dehancer that you can download from the App Store. And I think it's really, really impressive because it's giving you almost all the functionality and all the power that you're getting in the desktop version, but right on your mobile device. I spent some time poking around in it and got some really cool results. All the options like film prints, film compression, halation, and bloom are there. And you can really do some great stuff on the go with your photos as well. The app can get a little sluggish if you start hammering it with a ton of effects. For reference, I'm on an iPhone 13 Pro Max, so I'm not sure how much better the iPhone 14 would accelerate things, but I did find the render time to not be too bad, and the end results looked really, really good. Now, I'm not someone who typically does a lot of photo and video editing on their mobile device, so I'm not sure that the $79.99 annual subscription price is justified for me. But if you are a content creator who does a lot of photo and video editing on the go, I think you're gonna be really impressed with the amount of power they were able to smash down from the desktop version right into the iOS version. You've got pretty much all the same tools right at your fingertips in your mobile device. And lastly, I wanted to take a look at Handbrake. Again, a free application I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I'm sure many of you already have downloaded on your system for various other reasons. How I use that application to preserve all this grain work that we've done in color when going up to the web. Now, everyone has their own method of doing this, so if you've got something that works for you, keep on keeping on. But this is a process that I've turned a lot of people onto that seems to be able to generate pretty high quality files with their grain work preserved. And the best part is that the software I'm using is free. The software I'm talking about is Handbrake. This video is using version 1.6.1. Now, after you have Handbrake installed or updated, the first thing I typically do is export a high quality ProRes file from the NLE first. So I'm going to make a ProRes Quad 4 master here, making sure to check render at highest quality to be sure that the red footage is getting the maximum debayering quality coming out of DaVinci Resolve. Also, this file should match the resolution you are uploading to the web. In our case here, we want 4096 by 1716. And now I'll just go ahead and render this out. Once that's completed, I'm going to take this over to Handbrake and navigate to the exported file and select it. Once it loads, I'm going to change the preset tab here to Production Max and select Web Optimized. Now, we already exported the ProRes master at our desired dimension, so we can leave these values alone. We're going to leave filters alone as well and come straight to the Video tab. For Video Encoder, we will select H.265, 10-bit, X.265. In my experience, anything higher than this setting tends to create files that have difficulty playing back on most computers. We can leave constant frame rate selected. And now here's where there's a bit of a guessing game in Handbrake. Constant quality is going to essentially determine not only the overall quality of the compressed video, but also its file size. Unlike Adobe Media Encoder, Handbrake does not give a file size estimated, which is kind of a pain and can lead to some time wasted in trying to figure out where to set the slider to ensure you don't get a file that is too large or creating a file that is under the quality threshold. The higher you take the slider to the left, the worse the quality will be, but the smaller the file size. The more you slide to the right, the bigger the file size, but the better the quality. For For shorter form works like this test, I find that 15 RF to 10 RF seems to be a good spot. For longer form works, 45 minutes or over, you may need to be in the 22 RF to 15 RF range. Here, under encoder options, I will typically change the speed to medium for most files that are going out to clients for review and are not final deliverable files. If this is a final deliverable file and you're not racing against a deadline, I will opt for slow or slower depending on the length of the project. For what it's worth, I find the difference in video rendering past slow to be almost indiscernible. Now, here's the secret sauce and the main reason why we're using Handbrake. The most important part is to change tune from none to grain. Whatever sorcery is going on under Handbrake's hood works wonders for making sure grain is preserved when uploaded to YouTube and similar streaming platforms and video applications. Start the rendering process and let your workstation do its thing. Do keep in mind that unlike Adobe Media Encoder or Resolve, Handbrake is CPU processor intensive and not GPU processor intensive. So it does tend to be much slower than those other options. But I think it's a small sacrifice and trade-off for the wonderful end result of preserving our grain work the way we intended, without the need of exporting and uploading massive files, which can be even more time consuming if you have slower internet upload speeds. And there you have it. Hope this video was helpful to you, helpful to your workflow. I want to thank you for watching, and I want to wish you all the best luck and success in all your projects, present and future. Till the next time, ciao.